The late afternoon sun hung over Buffalo Gap like a brass coin, baking the single-rooted street until the dust shimmered with heat. Ava Hargrove stood in the narrow shade beside Yancey's general store. Her 3 children pressed against her faded calico skirt as though they could disappear into its worn fabric. The youngest, Thomas, barely 5 years old, made small whimpering sounds she couldn't sue away. His older sister, Margaret, stood rigid at 12, her thin shoulders squared, despite the hunger that had carved shadows beneath her eyes. Between them, Owen, at 9 years, swayed slightly, his cracked lips moving soundlessly as he counted something only he could see. Ava's hands trembled as she clutched an empty flour sack, her knuckles white against the rough burlap. Inside the store, she could see shelves lined with abundant sacks of cornmeal, stacked high smoked hams hanging from hooks, jars of preserved peaches, glowing amber in the lamplight. So much food so impossibly far from her reach. "I told you twice already, Mrs. Hargrove." Sam Yancey's voice carried through the open doorway, thick with contempt. He was a heavy man with pale, doughy features and small eyes that never seemed to blink. "No credit for beggars. Your husband ain't around no more to vouch for debts, and I sure as blazes ain't running a charity operation." The words hit Eva like physical blows. She'd walked 6 miles in the brutal heat. Thomas stumbling every few steps. Margaret carrying Owen's weight when his legs gave out because the alternative was watching them waste away in the cabin. The creek that had once run clear and cold through their land now barely trickled, and without water, nothing grew. The garden had withered. The chickens had died. Even the wild rabbits had moved on, seeking water elsewhere. "Please, Mr. Yancey." Her voice came out hoarse, unfamiliar to her own ears. "Just a little cornmeal, some salt pork, anything. I can work it off. I can scrub floors, take in washing work." Yancey laughed a wet, unpleasant sound. "What work? Your land ain't worth spit without water. Woman Creek's been bone dry since June. You got nothing I want, and I got mouths to feed that actually pay." Thomas began to cry, not the loud wails of a healthy child, but thin, exhausted sobs that made Ava's chest ache with a physical pain. She pulled him closer, feeling how light he'd become, how his ribs pressed against her palm. "Mr. Yancey, they're children. They're hungry. Surely you can." A shadow moved in the doorway, and Eva realized someone else had been standing there, silent and still as stone. A Lakota man, tall and lean, dressed in worn buckskin trousers and a plain cotton shirt that had been mended several times. His hair hung in 2 long braids wrapped with strips of red trade cloth, and a single eagle feather was bound tightly at the base of his skull with sinew. His face was weathered and angular with deep-set eyes that took in the scene with an unsettling calm. Thomas, in his distress, had wandered toward the stranger without Ava noticing. The Lakota man shifted the canvas-wrapped bundle he carried under one arm and reached down, taking the boy's small hand in his own large one. The gesture was so natural, so protective and gentle, that Ava's breath caught in her throat. Yancey's face darkened when he spotted the man. "You got business here? Oh, you just collecting strays like some kind of charity saint?" The man, said nothing, but his gaze locked on Yancey with a steady, patient focus of a hunter watching prey. Yancey's hand disappeared beneath the counter. Ava saw the movement and understood immediately. Her heart lurched into her throat. She grabbed for Owen and Margaret, trying to pull them back toward the street, but O moved first. In one fluid stride, he positioned himself between Yancey's counter and her family. His body a wall. The pistol Yancey had been reaching for remained hidden, but the threat hung in the dusty air like gun smoke. "You aiming to threaten a paying customer, Sam?" Oh, Hiteka's voice was quiet, almost gentle. The very softness of it made the danger beneath more terrifying. Yanzi's face flushed an ugly purple. "She ain't paying nothing, and you know it. And you got no call interfering in matters that don't concern your kind." Oh, ignored him entirely. He turned to Eva, and his eyes were dark and steady as deep water. When he spoke, his words were pitched low beneath the hot wind rattling through the gaps in the storefront meant only for her. "Ride with me. I'll fill your table tonight." Eva stared at him. Pride warred with desperation in her chest, a battle she'd fought every day since Nathaniel died. Ride alone across the prairie with a Lakota warrior. Take her children into the wilderness with a stranger. People already whispered about the widow Hargrove, about how maybe her husband's death hadn't been the accident everyone claimed, about how she had no business trying to hold that land alone. But Thomas was crying, and Margaret's eyes had gone glassy with exhaustion, and Owen was swaying like a sapling in a strong wind. She looked at the store, at Yanzi's cruel, satisfied smirk. She looked at her children so thin she could count their bones. She looked at Ohitka, at the steady calm in his weathered face, at the way he still held Thomas's hand with such careful gentleness. She took a breath that hurt her ribs and nodded once. They left Buffalo Gap as the sun bled crimson behind the black hills, turning the endless prairie grass to burnished copper. "Oh, is a spotted geeling bred by the Nez Perce." A sturdy spotted horse with intelligent eyes carried Thomas and Owen, the two boys clinging to the saddle horn with white-knuckle determination. Margaret rode behind Eva on a gray mule that Big Ben Hollister had let out from behind his stable, without speaking, just a long, meaningful look at Eva that said, "Bring it back when you can," and a shorter measuring look at Ohiteka that said, "Hurt them, and I'll find you." Big Ben Hollister was one of the few decent men left in Buffalo Gap who still had spine enough to show it. A former buffalo hunter who turned to farming after the herds vanished. He stood 6'6", with shoulders like an ox and hands that could crush walnuts. He'd lost his wife Martha to cholera 2 winters past and understood what it meant to be alone in hard country. The color of a man's skin mattered less to him than whether that man treated others with decency. The prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and indifferent to human suffering. The summer drought had turned the grass brown and brittle, and each step the animals took raised small clouds of dust that caught Anna's throat. Her hands ached from gripping the mule's coarse mane. She hadn't ridden in months. There had been no reason to leave the cabin, and no animal to ride if she had. Nathaniel had sold their horses in March, desperately trying to raise money for seed that never sprouted. O rode ahead, his posture relaxed, but his eyes constantly scanning the horizon with the ease of someone who'd been born reading this land. He didn't speak much conserving words the way he seemed to conserve everything, but every so often he'd point once at a red-tailed hawk circling high in the thermals, once at a coyote den tucked into an eroded wash, once at a shallow depression in the earth where he said water had pulled last spring and would again when the rains returned, if they returned. When the light faded from gold to purple and the first stars appeared like ice chips in the darkening sky, O stopped near a line of cottonwood trees that marked a dry creek bed. The trees were still alive, and their roots reaching deep enough to find moisture, but their leaves hung limp and dusty. "Here," he said simply, swinging down from his horse with fluid grace. The children slid off stiff and sore from riding. Thomas immediately sat down in the dirt and began crying again, and the exhausted hiccuping sobs of a child pushed far beyond his limits. Margaret knelt beside him and stroked his hair with thin fingers, her young face aged by worry into something that looked ancient. "Can you gather sticks for a fire?" Oka asked Margaret. His voice still carried that quiet gentleness. "Dry ones, no thicker than your thumb. Stay within sight." Margaret glanced at Eva, who nodded. The girl stood, and Owen followed her into the scrub brush like a faithful shadow. Ava dismounted, and her legs nearly buckled under her own weight. Uka caught her elbow, just a light, steadying touch over in a heartbeat, but the contact sent heat flooding through her face despite the cooling evening air. "Thank you," she managed, her voice raw. "For this, for helping us." He shook his head, already moving. "Not done yet." He unslung the canvas bundle from his saddle and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a Henry rifle, the brass receiver gleaming dully in the twilight, clearly well maintained and much used. He also produced a narrow throwing lance with a fire-hardened point, the shaft worn smooth by many hands, and a coil of thin rope that looked like braided horsehair. Without another word, he walked toward the dry creek bed. Ava followed curiosity, overcoming her exhaustion. The creek bed was mostly cracked mud and smooth stones, but here and there, water still lingered in the deep pockets, stagnant and warm. O crouched beside the nearest pool, his head cocked, listening to something Ava couldn't hear. Then, with startling speed, he thrust the lance into the murky water and lifted it smoothly. Speared cleanly through the body was a fat bullfrog, its legs twitching. He killed it with a quick practice twist that was almost merciful, then moved to the next pool. Within 10 minutes, he'd speared 3 frogs and fashioned a snare from the rope, setting it in the brush near where animal tracks converged. "Rabbits come at evening to drink what little there is," he explained quietly. "We wait." They didn't wait long. As Margaret and Owen returned with armfuls of dry sticks, and Eva coaxed a small fire to life using the flint and steel Oheka handed her, the snare jerked suddenly. Teka rose without hurry and walked into the darkening brush, returning moments later with a jackrabbit, its neck cleanly broken. Owen stared at the rabbit, then at Ohite Teka, his eyes wide. "How did you know it would come? Animals need water, same as people. When water is scarce, they become predictable." Oka glanced at Eva, a silent question in his eyes. She understood what he was asking and bit her lip, then nodded. He handed Owen a small sharp knife with a worn bone handle. "I'll show you how to clean it without wasting meat. Watch first." Owen's hands shook, but he watched with fierce concentration as Oka made the first careful cuts, peeling hide from flesh, with efficient movements that wasted nothing. Margaret edged closer to watch her hunger, temporarily forgotten in fascination. While they worked, Ava pulled the empty grain sacks from her pack, intending to fold them. She noticed something she'd seen before, but never really looked at a brand burned into the corner of each sack, a circle with a notch cut at the top. Yanzi's mark. She'd bought seed from him last spring on credit Nathaniel had somehow managed to secure, though he'd never explained how. The seed had been poor quality, half of it rotten, and almost nothing had sprouted. Oh. Ida's eyes lingered on the brand. Something shifted in his expression, a tightness around his mouth, a narrowing of his eyes. He said nothing, but Eva noticed him studying the mark with unusual intensity, as though memorizing it. They roasted the frogs and rabbit over the small fire, the smell making Eva's stomach clench, with hunger so fierce it felt like illness. When the meat was ready, Ohite divided it carefully, giving the largest portions to the children without comment. Thomas gnawed on a frog leg with both hands, grease running down his chin, and the sight made Eva want to weep with relief and shame in equal measure. She took a small piece of rabbit, chewing slowly to make it last. The meat was tough and dry, but it was food, real food, and her body responded with desperate gratitude. Beside her, O ate sparingly, his eyes still scanning the darkness beyond the firelight, small circle of safety. "Why did you help us?" Ava asked suddenly. The question had been building in her chest since they left town. Uka was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward into the vast darkness. Finally, he spoke, his voice flat and distant. I had a family once. Wife named Winona. Son called Little Hawk, maybe 4 years. Daughter named Zitka, just learning to walk. The past tense sat between them like a corpse. White ranchers built a dam on the creek north of our winter camp. They claimed the land was theirs by treaty, claimed the water was theirs by right. When the creek ran dry, our horses began to die. Then the people started getting sick from bad water. Little Hawk died first. His hands tightened on the stick he held until it cracked. Winona took Zitkala and went to her brother's people 200 mamithramis north. I never saw them again. That was 10 years past. Aa's throat closed painfully. I'm so sorry. He shook his head sharply. I learned to live among white settlements after that. Learn the language, learn the ways. But I watch when I see a man steal water that does not belong to him. When I see powerful men crush those who cannot fight back, I remember everything. You think someone is stealing our water? I know it. He looked at her directly. Your creek at floodplain. It was full last spring. Yes. Ava nodded slowly, memory bringing fresh pain. It ran high with snowmelt. Nathaniel said it was the best flow he'd seen in 3 years. Then in April, middle of the night, there was a flood. The water came all at once like a wall. It took him. Her voice broke on the last word. She swallowed hard. After that, the creek ran lower each week. By June, it was barely a trickle. Now it's almost dry. Uka's eyes were distant, calculating. I have seen a place north of town near the old grain mill. Sacks rot there in a pile hidden in brush. They carry the same mark as yours, circle with a notch. And I have seen men watching the creek at odd hours. Men who work for white buffalo cattle. They watch, but they do not patrol. They guard something. Ava's heart began to pound. What are they guarding? Tomorrow we find out. He touched his chest with one hand. Oh, it means brave in the old tongue. She almost smiled, though it felt strange on her face. Ava, it means life in Hebrew. My grandmother's choice. He looked at her, then really looked, not just glancing, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of 2 people who had survived when they should not have, who kept going when stopping would have been easier. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we hunt truth, not rabbits. I can track shoot if needed. Ava's voice came out stronger than she expected. I won't be dead weight. I know. He nodded, a small gesture of respect that warmed her more than the fire. You're still here. That takes strength. As the children fell asleep by the dying flames, curled together for warmth, like a litter of puppies, Orica moved to position himself between them and the northern wind that had begun to blow cold off the Black Hills. He sat with his back against a smooth boulder, the Henry rifle laid across his knees, and watched the darkness. With half-closed eyes that missed nothing, Ava lay down beside Margaret, pulling their single thin blanket over them both. But sleep didn't come immediately. She found herself watching Height, the way firelight and shadow played across his profile, the way his body never fully relaxed, even though his breathing slowed and deepened. She realized he was standing guard over them, protecting them the way a father would, the way Nathaniel used to. The thought brought tears, but also something else. A small spark of hope she'd thought long extinguished. When she finally slept, it was the first night in 4 months she didn't dream of drowning. Dawn came cold and sharp. The sky washed pale blue with streaks of pink along the eastern horizon. Woke them before the sun fully cleared the earth's rim, and they ate the leftover rabbit cold, chewing in silence. Thomas clung to Eva's skirt, still half asleep, but no longer crying. Owen and Margaret moved with new energy. A single full meal had changed something fundamental in their bodies and spirits. They rode northeast, following the network of dry creek beds that threaded through the broken hills. The land here was rougher than the open prairie, cut by outcroppings of red sandstone and scattered stands of twisted juniper. Oiteka led them up a narrow game trail that climbed steadily toward Lightning Ridge, a long spine of rock and earth that jutted from the landscape like a broken backbone. By mid-morning, the sun was already brutal, and they'd emptied Oka's canteen. Eva's lips were cracked, her tongue thick in her mouth. But they pressed on until they reached Oxbow Bend, where the creek made a sharp turn before cutting through a narrow gorge. Here the land dropped away into a canyon, perhaps 30 ft deep. The walls striped with layers of pale chalk and rust-cold stone that marked ancient water levels. The creek bed at the bottom was damp in places, with thin trickles of water collecting in shallow pools far less than there should be. Oh, Haida dismounted and handed his reins to Margaret. "Wait here. Keep the children quiet. If I whistle like a meadowlark, come down. If you hear shots, ride back toward town fast as you can. Do not wait for me." "What are you looking for?" Ava asked, her heart beginning to hammer. "Proof." He started down the slope, moving from boulder to boulder with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat. Ava watched him disappear around a bend in the canyon. Minutes crawled past. Thomas whimpered softly. Margaret's hand found Eva's and squeezed hard. The sun beat down mercilessly. Then Oka reappeared, climbing back up with urgent speed, his face grim as a thunderhead. "There's a dam," he said quietly, breathing hard. "In the side gorge, maybe 200 wide upstream, rock and timber well built, backed up water for hundreds of yards. Someone is using it to control everything downstream." Ava felt her blood turn to ice. Water to control who gets water, who doesn't, who can farm, who starves, who keeps land, who sells cheap. His jaw clenched. It's illegal under territorial law, but who enforces that law out here when the sheriff himself might be paid to look away? That's why our crops failed. That's why Ava's voice died in her throat as understanding crashed over her like cold water. That's why Nathaniel died. Before Ohite could respond, the sharp crack of hooves on stone echoed from above. He spun, reaching for his rifle. Two riders appeared on the canyon rim, silhouetted against the morning sky. One was lean as a whip, with a jaw scarred by an old knife wound that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer-deadshot pike known throughout 3 counties as the fastest gun and between Deadwood and Denver. The other was younger, maybe 25, wearing a fancy brocade vest and a flat-crowned hat with a silver-band Goldie head foreman for White Buffalo Cattle, the largest ranch operation in the territory. Pike's hand was already resting on his revolver. "Well, now what you doing down there?" "Oh, fishing in a dry creek." Oka said nothing. He took 2 deliberate steps sideways, putting himself directly between the mounted men and Eva's family. Goldie grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Looks like he's got company. The widow Harg Grove, if I ain't mistaken. Heard you've been begging at the store. Mrs. Hard times for them that can't manage their affairs." Ava's face burned, but she kept her mouth shut and her hands on the children, pulling them behind her. Pike's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You've seen something you shouldn't have, Indian, and you brought witnesses. That's mighty unfortunate for everyone involved." His revolver cleared leather in a blur of motion. The shot cracked across the canyon like a whip, and stone exploded 6 in from Eva's head, sharp fragments stinging her cheek. She screamed and threw herself over Thomas, dragging him toward a crevice in the chalk wall. Margaret grabbed Owen's arm, and they ran, scrambling for cover. Oh, Tekka was already moving. He dropped to one knee and brought the Henry rifle up in one smooth motion, firing almost before the stock touched his shoulder. The bullet struck sparks off a rock inches from Goldie's left boot. Goldie's horse reared screaming, and he fought the reins with both hands, cursing viciously. Pike fired again. The bullet winded off stone somewhere close, and Eva felt the heat of its passage. She pressed Thomas deeper into the crevice, shielding him with her body, her heart trying to hammer through her ribs. Oka levered another round into the chamber with practice speed and fired again. This shot clipped the brim of Goldie's hat, spinning it off his head to tumble down into the canyon. "Fall back!" Pike snarled at Goldie. They wheeled their horses and disappeared over the rim, but Pike's voice echoed down like a curse. "You're dead, Oka. You and that white trash both. There ain't nowhere you can hide." The silence after they left was deafening, except for the ringing in Eva's ears. She stayed frozen in the crevice arms, locked around Thomas. Margaret pressed against her side, both of them shaking violently. Owen was on the ground a few feet away, clutching his left forearm. Blood seeped dark between his fingers. "Owen!" Eva lunged for him, her hands shaking so badly she could barely function. The boy's face was bone white, his lips pressed together hard to hold back cries of pain. Ateka was there instantly. He knelt and gently pried Owen's hand away from the wound. A deep, ragged gash ran along the boy's forearm, from wrist nearly to elbow, where he'd fallen on a sharp stone in his desperate scramble for cover. It wasn't a bullet wound, but it was bad bleeding. Steadily, the edges torn rather than clean. "Hold him steady." O's voice was calm, clinical anchoring Eva's panic. He pulled a small leather kit from his belt and opened it. Inside were clean strips of linen, a small tin of strong-smelling salve, and a bone needle with thread. Eva cradled Owen against her chest, whispering soothing nonsense, while Oiteka poured water from his canteen over the wound. Owen hissed through clenched teeth, tears streaming silently down his face, but he didn't scream. O worked quickly, smearing the salve along the wound. It smelled of sage and pine resin, and something else Eva didn't recognize, then wrapping it tightly in clean linen. During the work, Eva noticed O positioning himself so his body blocked the canyon rim, shielding both her and Owen from any follow-up shots. When their eyes met over Owen's head, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. "Keep it clean. Change the wrapping every day." O looked at Owen seriously. "You were brave. It will scar, but it will heal." Owen nodded, still crying silently. O stood and scanned the rim again, his entire body tense as a drawn bowstring. "They know we found the dam. They'll report back to whoever pays them. We need to move now, get to town, find people who will stand with us. Alone, we're targets. Together, we have a chance." They rode hard toward Buffalo Gap, pushing the animals dangerously fast. O led his body positioned so that anyone shooting from behind would hit him first. Eva noticed. She noticed the way he kept glancing back to check on Owen, the way he slowed the pace when Thomas started to slip from the saddle, the way his jaw tightened each time Margaret made a small frightened sound. Dr. Eliza Morrell lived in a narrow two-story house painted cheerful yellow, though the paint was peeling now from weather and neglect. A hand-painted sign hung beside the door. "Physician and surgeon, all welcome." She was a small, wiry woman in her mid-40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp green eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She'd come west from Boston 5 years ago, after her husband died of consumption, determined to practice medicine in a place where people didn't ask too many questions about a woman with a medical degree from an Eastern medical college that admitted women. The door opened before they could knock. Dr. Morrill took one look at Owen's blood-soaked bandage and stepped back, waving them inside with brisk efficiency. "Examination table now." She pointed to a sturdy wooden table in her front room. The space smelled sharply of carbolic acid and more pleasantly of dried lavender. Shelves lined every wall, crammed with bottles, jars, instruments, and leather-bound medical texts. Owen climbed onto the table with Eva's help, his face still pale. Dr. Morurell unwrapped the bandage with practiced fingers, her lips pursing as she examined the wound. "Clean work," she murmured, glancing at Ohite with surprise. "You did this?" He nodded once. "Very clean. Probably saved him from serious infection." She reached for a brown bottle. "This will sting worse than the original injury, son. Bite down on this." She handed Owen a strip of leather. She wasn't lying. Owen bit down hard, his back arching as she cleaned the wound with something that made him yelp despite his best efforts. Then she threaded a curved needle and began stitching with small, precise movements, drawing the torn edges together. Ava stood close by her hands, clasped so tightly her nails bit half-moons into her palms. Margaret and Thomas huddled by the door, watching with wide, frightened eyes. When Dr. Morurell finished, she tied off the thread and wrapped the wound in fresh linen. "Change this every 2 days. Keep it dry. If you see red streaks spreading from the wound, or if it starts to smell foul, bring him back immediately. That means infection, and infection kills." "Thank you." Ava's voice came out as a whisper. "I can't pay now, but I can work. I can." "I don't want your money, Ava Harrove." Dr. Morell's voice was brisk, but held an undertone of warmth. She turned to Oha, studying him with clinical interest. "Gunfight at Oxbow Bend. You heard already." Oteka's eyebrows rose slightly. "Nothing stays secret in a town this size. Deadshot Pike rode back through here 20 minutes ago, with Goldie heading straight for the White Buffalo Ranch. They looked mad as hornets." Dr. Morell's expression darkened. "Which means Julia Stanhope knows you found his dam by now." She pulled a thick folder from a drawer in her desk. "I've been documenting complaints about water theft, price gouging, and suspicious activity for 18 months. Letters I've written to the territorial marshal, but never sent because I don't trust the local telegraph operator. He's Sheriff Mallory's cousin, and I don't trust the mail to get through. Pike's men watch the roads." She opened the folder. Inside were at least a dozen handwritten letters, all carefully dated and detailed. Half the farmers in this county have been squeezed to the breaking point. Stanhope and Yancey, between them, control water through that illegal dam supplies, through Yancey's store monopoly and enforcement, through Sheriff Mallory, who I'm certain is on Stanhope's payroll. Eva felt hope and despair warring in her chest. "The circuit marshal, when does he come through?" "Not for another 10 days. Dr. Morell's voice was grim. "But there's a telegraph station in Ivory Tower, half a day's hard ride east. It's a federal relay station outside local control. If we could get proof to that telegraph, get a message directly to the territorial marshal's office in Yankton, he might come early." O had been studying the letters silently. Now he looked at Eva. "Your husband, you said he kept detailed records." "A ledger." Eva's breath caught. Yes, Nathaniel was meticulous. He recorded water levels every day, documented every delivery, every transaction, every conversation with officials about water rights. He kept it all in a leather-bound ledger. He said if we ever needed to prove our case for expanded access, we'd need documentation. Where is it now? Hidden in the cabin under a loose hearthstone by the fireplace. She swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "I haven't looked at it since he died. I couldn't bear to see his handwriting to remember." Oh met her eyes, his expression serious. "If that ledger contains evidence of water theft before and after the dam was built, if he recorded suspicious activity, if he named names, it could be the proof we need. The marshal would have to investigate." Dr. Morurell nodded slowly. Nathaniel Hargrove was a careful man. If anyone documented this conspiracy, he did. But Eva, getting that ledger means going back to your cabin. And if Stan hopes people know you're involved now, they might be watching it. Eva felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. Going back to the cabin meant facing the place where she and Nathaniel had built their life together, where they'd been happy before the drought and the struggle and the death. It meant opening that hearthstone and reading his words, seeing his careful handwriting. But it also meant justice for Nathaniel, for her children, for everyone Stan Hope and his people had heard. "We go tonight," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. After dark, Dr. Morell reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small glass vial. "Laudanum for Owen. If the pain becomes severe, no more than 3 drops in water at a time." She looked at Ohitkika directly. "Keep them safe." His answer was silence, but the look in his eyes was answer enough. They left the children with Dr. Morell. As evening shadows lengthened across Buffalo Gap, Margaret had protested fiercely, but Eva held her daughter's face between her hands and spoke with quiet intensity. "You're 12 years old, Margaret. That's old enough to be strong. Your brothers need you to watch over them tonight. Can you do that?" Margaret's jaw set in a way that reminded Eva painfully of Nathaniel. "I can't. But you come back, Ma. You promise." "I promise." Eva kissed her forehead, hoping desperately she could keep that promise. They slipped out the back door and made their way to Big Ben Hollister's stable. The massive man was waiting in the shadows, and he handed O a Winchester rifle and Eva a worn Colt revolver in a gun belt. "Winchester was my daddy's," Big Ben said quietly. "Shoots true. Colt belonged to my brother Thomas before cholera took him. Both of you know how to use them, I trust." Eva buckled the gun belt around her waist, feeling its weight. She'd shot rifles and pistols before every frontier woman learned, but never at a person. The thought made her stomach turn, but she nodded. Big Ben's weathered face was grave. "Your man Nathaniel. He was good folk, honest worker, never cheated nobody. If someone done him wrong, I want to see that made right." He paused. "Be careful. Sheriff Mallory's been drinking at the saloon all afternoon, talking loud about troublemakers and outside agitators. He's working himself up to something." They rode out under a sky, turning from gold to indigo, following back trails to avoid the main road. The prairie stretched before them, darkening rapidly. Eva's heart pounded with each mile that brought them closer to the cabin. The cabin stood alone in its shallow valley, looking abandoned in the pale moonlight. The creek that should have been singing over stones was silent, just a thread of moisture catching starlight. Eva dismounted and stood staring at the crooked door. O touched her shoulder lightly. "I'll check the perimeter first. Wait here." He disappeared into the shadows, moving with eerie silence. Eva stood holding the reins, every sound making her jump. 5 minutes felt like an hour. Then O materialized beside her, making her gasp. No one watching, but someone has been here recently. Tracks. 2 horses, maybe 3 days old. Eva's blood went cold, looking for the ledger. "Probably. We must be quick." The door creaked when Eva pushed it open. Inside moonlight, through the single window, illuminated furniture covered in dust. The cold hearth, the table where they'd shared meals. The air smelled of abandonment and grief. Eva crossed to the hearth and knelt her hands, finding the loose stone by memory. She pried it up, reached into the hollow space beneath empty. Her stomach plummeted. "It's gone. They took it." O beside her, instantly running his fingers along the edges of the hollow space, searching carefully. Then he pulled something small from a crack where it had been wedged a torn scrap of paper. He held it up to the moonlight. Eva leaned close to see it was torn from a ledger page. the edge ragged in Nathaniel's precise handwriting. April 10th, creek level 4 FT unto, in normal spring flow clear water. April 14th, massive surge at 3 out of 12 after dark. Creek rose to 8F in minutes, then dropped to 2F by dawn. Unnatural pattern. Check upstream gates. O's jaw tightened. Someone took the ledger but missed this piece. This proves the water pattern was wrong, unnatural. But we need more. We need to know who took it where they took it. Look at this. Eva had moved to the window pointing at the ground outside. In the dirt near the porch, clear in the moonlight, were tracks. 2 horses, both Shaw, but one set of tracks stood out, and the prints showed unusual wear. The outside edges of the horseshoes worn smooth, while the inside edges were deeper, suggesting a horse with an odd gait, or a rider who sat unbalanced. O studied the tracks, intently crouching to examine them closely. Distinctive pattern, easy to identify if we see these tracks again. He looked up at Ava. The tracks lead north toward Red Mesa. Red Mesa was a low plateau, 10 mi north, dotted with abandoned prospectors' shacks. Empty, isolated country. We follow them. Eva's voice was barely a whisper. At first light, too dangerous now. We could lose the trail in darkness or ride into an ambush. He stood. But there is something else we should look for. Your husband would not have kept all his records in one place. He was too careful. Ava blinked. What do you mean? Careful men make copies or keep the most important pieces separate. O looked around the cabin slowly. Where else would he hide something small, something important? Eva thought hard, her mind racing through memories. Nathaniel had been methodical, yes, but also sentimental. Where would he hide something he wanted her to find if something happened to him? Her eyes fell on the rocking chair, the chair where he'd carved wooden animals for the children on winter evenings. She crossed to it, running her hands along the worn wood. Nothing. Then she checked beneath the seat, and her fingers found a small compartment, cunningly made, barely visible. Inside was another folded page from the ledger. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. This page was different, dated April 14th, written in shakier handwriting, as though Nathaniel had been writing in poor light or great haste. April 14th evening. Received word from Percy Hartwell that upper gate stuck open water, backing up dangerous fast. Rode out alone to check and close it if needed. 11:15 p.m. Found upper gate jammed with brush and debris. Debris looked deliberately placed, not natural. Took 40 minutes to clear. Closed gate. 11:55 p.m. Riding back down canyon. Saw lantern light on ridge above lower gate. Not usual patrol time or place. Rode closer to investigate. 12:20 a.m. Saw 2 men at lower gate. One short and heavy. Looked like Sheriff Mallory's build, but too dark to be certain. Other man taller wearing white buffalo cattle hat. They opened lower gate while I watched from cover. Note 2 gates open simultaneously, creates flash flood through gorge. They knew I was upstream. This was deliberate trap. Eva's vision blurred with tears, her hands trembling so violently the paper rattled. They tried to kill him that night. They opened both gates to create a flood while he was in the gorge. Oh, read over her shoulder, his breathing controlled but rapid. Keep a reading. 12:45 a.m. Flash flood came. Tried to reach high ground, but horse went down. Thrown into current. Managed to catch driftwood. Rode it 2 minutes before washing ashore near Cedar Ford. Half drowned. Dawn made it back to town. Went straight to Dr. Morrell. Told her everything. She treated me for exposure and injuries. Must get ledger to her for safekeeping. Then ride to Yankton to report to Territorial Marshal. Important boot prints at lower gate. One man wore distinctive boots worn smooth on outside edges, deep on inside edges. Same pattern I've seen Sheriff Mallory wear many times. Almost certain it was him. The page ended there, torn across the bottom. Eva looked up at Ohite, her face wet with tears. He survived the flood. He made it back to town alive. So her voice broke. They killed him after. Oka finished grimly. They must have been watching Dr. Morell's house. When he left weak and injured, they followed him, caught him somewhere between town and here, drowned him for real this time, made it look like delayed effects of the flood. Mallory. Ava's voice was flat dead. Sheriff Mallory murdered my husband. Oh, carefully folded the page and tucked it inside his shirt. This is evidence. This is proof. The boot pattern can be verified. If Mallory still wears those boots, we can identify them. Combined with the strange water pattern, the dam, the testimony of others, this is enough to demand a marshal's inquiry. Eva stood slowly, her legs shaking. Grief and rage whirred inside her, hot and cold by turns. The man who was supposed to uphold the law had murdered her husband, and everyone in Buffalo Gap had believed the lie. "We need to get to that telegraph station," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We need to get this to the territorial marshal before Mallory knows we have it." A sound outside froze them both. Hoof beats multiple horses approaching fast. Oatika moved to the window, peering out carefully. Riders, 5, maybe 6, coming from town. Mallory cannot tell in the dark, but they are not friendly. Riding too fast, too direct. He grabbed Eva's hand. "Back door now." They ran through the cabin and out the back door, sprinting for the horses. Behind them, the front door crashed open. A voice shouted, "Search it! They were here!" Oh, and Eva mounted and rode hard into the darkness, low over their horses' necks. Shots cracked behind the muzzle flashes, lighting the night. A bullet winded past Ava's ear, close enough that she felt its passage. They rode northeast toward the broken country, where pursuit would be difficult in darkness. Behind them, more shots, more shouts, but gradually the sounds faded. They rode for an hour, before O finally slowed in a narrow canyon, dismounting to check their back trail. "We lost them, but they know we were there. They know we're looking for evidence." Ava slid from the mule, her whole body shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. O steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and solid and real. "We cannot go back to town yet," he said quietly. "Too dangerous. We rest here a few hours, then at first light, we ride to Red Mesa. Find whoever took the ledger, get it back, then we ride straight to Ivory Tower and that federal telegraph." Ava nodded, unable to speak. O built a tiny fire in the shelter of an overhang, barely enough to warm them. They sat close together, sharing body heat as the night grew cold. "Your husband was a brave man," Oka said after a long silence. "He fought for what was right, even knowing it was dangerous." "He was stubborn," Ava whispered. "I used to get angry about it. He wouldn't let things go, wouldn't accept injustice even when fighting it put us at risk. Now I understand. He was trying to protect us, protect everyone. He did protect you. He left you the truth." Oka looked at her in the firelight. "Now we honor him by finishing what he started." Their eyes met and held. Ava felt something shift in her chest, gratitude mixing with something deeper, something she couldn't name yet and wasn't ready to examine. She reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched the bandage on Oitika's shoulder where a bullet had grazed him during their escape. "You're hurt." "Barely." But he didn't pull away from her touch. "You keep putting yourself between me and danger," she said quietly. "Why?" He was silent for a moment. "Because I know what it means to lose family to powerful men who take what they want. I could not save my family. Perhaps I can help you save yours." Something in his voice, old pain buried deep, made Ava's throat tighten. She left her hand on his shoulder a moment longer than necessary, feeling his warmth through the fabric. When she finally pulled away, the air between them still hummed with something unspoken. They took turns keeping watch through the cold night. And when dawn finally came, they rode north toward Red Mesa, toward answers, towards the next piece of the puzzle that would bring justice or death. The tracks were easy to follow in the morning light. Two horses heading north, one with that distinctive wear pattern on its shoes. They led through increasingly rough country, winding between rocky outcrops and dry washes. As they neared Red Mesa, Oha grew more cautious, pausing frequently to study the land ahead. "We are being predictable," he murmured. "If someone wanted to ambush us, this is where they would do it." He was right. As they entered a narrow canyon leading up to the mesa, Oiteka suddenly raised his hand and pointed. There, stretched across the trail at knee height, barely visible against the dusty ground, was a thin wire, a trip line. "Stay here." "Oh." Teka dismounted and approached on foot, moving with infinite care. He followed the wire to a stake driven into the ground, examined it closely, then carefully worked it loose. The wire went slack. He waved Eva forward. As she rode past, leading the mule carefully, she drew level with him. Their eyes met. His hand reached out ostensibly to steady the mule, but his fingers brushed her belt and lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary. In that brief contact, Eva became acutely aware of everything: the warmth of his hand and the way his dark eyes searched hers with concern, and something else she couldn't quite name. Her breath caught. Heat flooded her face. Then he stepped back, releasing her, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them, some barrier beginning to dissolve. They continued on foot, leading the horses. Near the top of the mesa, tucked against a rock face, stood a leaning shack with a half-collapsed roof. Smoke rose thin and gray from a rusted stovepipe. One horse was tied outside in sparse shade, the one with the distinctive horseshoes. They crouched behind scrub juniper, watching and waiting. The sun climbed, bringing brutal heat. No movement from the shack for over an hour. Finally, the door opened. A man emerged, thin and hawk-faced with a scraggly beard, wearing a dirty canvas coat. Eva didn't recognize him. He carried a rifle carelessly over his shoulder, untied the horse, and rode south toward Buffalo Gap at an easy trot. They waited until he was completely out of sight. Then they moved. O approached the shack from one side, Eva from the other, both with weapons ready. The door hung crooked on leather hinges. O kicked it open and swept inside, rifle up, empty. But on a rickety table in the corner sat a potbelly stove, still warm. And inside the stove, half-burned, were the charred remains of a ledger. Ava's heart sank as she pulled out what was left. Most of the pages were ash crumbling at a touch, but a few pages had survived at the bottom, protected from the worst of the flames. She smoothed them carefully on the table. Dates, creek-level measurements, names: Julius Stanhope, Sam Yancey, Sheriff Thomas Mallory, and a crude but clear diagram showing the creek system with two gates marked, one upstream controlling flow into a reservoir, one downstream at Oxbow Bend, controlling release at the bottom of one partially burned page payment received by TM from J. Stanhope, amount $50 gold, purpose: ignored dam construction, witnessed by myself, and Hargrove must report to federal authority. They tried to destroy it, Eva whispered, but they didn't finish the job. O was studying the diagram intently. This shows exactly where the gates are, how the system works. Combined with what your husband wrote about the night he died. This is proof of conspiracy and murder. A sound outside made them both freeze, hoofbeats, returning multiple riders this time. Blast. O hissed. The man who left, he went for reinforcements. They ran for the back of the shack, but there was no back door. They were trapped. The roof, Oka said urgently. Where it's collapsed, we can climb out. They scrambled up using a broken chair, pulling themselves through the gap in the roof. O went first, then reached back to pull Eva up. His hand gripped hers strong and sure, and for a moment they were pressed close together on the unstable roof, breathing hard faces inches apart. Then they dropped to the ground on the backside and ran for their horses, hidden in a draw 50 yards away. Behind them, men's voices shouted, "They were here! Search the area!" Eva and Oiteka mounted and rode hard, circling west before turning south, away from the direct route back to Buffalo Gap. They rode for miles, pushing the animals hard until satisfied they'd lost pursuit. They stopped in a sheltered canyon to rest the horses and examine what they'd recovered. 3 partially burned pages from the ledger, the page from the cabin about the night Nathaniel nearly died, and the scrap about the unusual water surge. "It's not the complete ledger," Ava said, frustration and fear in her voice. "Will it be enough?" "It has to be." O'Hite's face was grim. "We have proof of the damn proof of payment to Malalari, proof of the unusual water pattern, and your husband's testimony about what he witnessed. If we can get this to the Federal Telegraph at Ivory Tower, the Territorial Marshal will have to investigate. Then we ride for Ivory Tower now. No, first we go back to town. Gather anyone who will stand with us. Safety in numbers." And he paused. "Dr. Morrell can add her testimony. She treated your husband that night. She heard his account before he died. That makes her a witness." Eva nodded slowly. "And we need to verify Maller's boots. If they match the pattern Nathaniel described, that's physical evidence." They rode back toward Buffalo Gap as the sun began its descent. Both of them knowing they were riding into danger, but having no other choice. They reached Dr. Morell's house after dark, coming in through back alleys. The doctor met them at her door with barely suppressed relief. "Thank the stars. I thought, when you didn't return by afternoon, I thought the worst." She pulled them inside. "Your children are safe, Ava. They're upstairs sleeping, but Buffalo Gap is like a powder keg tonight. Sheriff Mallory has been drinking heavily and spreading word that you and Oha murdered a man at Red Mesa. He's calling for a posy." "That's a lie," Eva said flatly. "Of course it is. But Mallory's the law here, and people are frightened." Dr. Morell looked at the burned pages they carried. "Did you find the ledger?" "Part of it, and this." Eva showed her the page about the night Nathaniel nearly died. Dr. Morrell read it, her face growing pale, then hard. "I remember that night as clear as yesterday. Nathaniel came to my door just before dawn, soaking wet, shivering, violently, barely able to stand. He told me everything about the gates, about seeing someone on the ridge with a lantern, about boot prints with unusual wear." Her voice grew thick with emotion. "I treated him for exposure and injuries, broken ribs, deep bruising, possible concussion. He was in no condition to travel, but he insisted he had to get his ledger and bring it to me for safekeeping. He left my house around 7 in the morning. I begged him to rest longer, but he said time was critical. That was the last time I saw him alive." "When did they find his body?" Oka asked quietly. 2 hours later, in the creek at Cedar Ford, about 3 mi from here. Mallory said he'd obviously succumbed to his injuries and fallen in. Everyone believed it." She looked at Eva with anguished eyes. "I should have known. I should have questioned it. But I was so focused on saving the patients I had that I didn't look hard enough at the patient I'd lost." "You couldn't have known," Eva said, though grief made her voice harsh. "You're not to blame. Mallory is, Stan Hope is, the men who killed him are." A knock at the back door made them all jump. Dr. Morell answered it cautiously, then stepped back to admit Big Ben Hollister. The massive man had to duck to get through the doorway. "Ben," Dr. Morrell said. "Thank goodness. Heard you folks were back." Big Ben looked at Oka and Ava gravely. "Town's in an uproar. Mallory's at the saloon with Pike and 6 hired guns working men up about outside agitators and Indian trouble. He's planning something for tomorrow talk, as he'll search every building, arrest anyone who helped you. We need to get to Ivory Tower." O said, "Get this evidence to the Federal Telegraph before Mallory can stop us." "You'll never make it," Big Ben said bluntly. "Mallory has men watching the East Road. You'd ride straight into them." Eva felt desperation rising. "Then what do we do?" The back door opened again, and Phoebe Ward slipped inside, the young schoolteacher, barely 25, with bright, intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Behind her came Gustav, the Swedish miller, and Percy Hartwell, a quiet farmer with steady hands. "We stand together," Phoebe said firmly. "There are more decent people in this town than corrupt ones. We've been scared and divided, but if we stand together, Mallory can't touch all of us." "The girl's right," Gustav rumbled in his thick accent. "I have been too long quiet. My family needs this water. All families need it. Time to fight for what is right." Percy nodded silently, checking his rifle. Big Ben crossed his massive arms. "I've been spreading word quiet. There's maybe 20, 25 people willing to stand up if someone leads. They're waiting for a sign that resistance is possible." Dr. Morrell looked at Ohiteteka and Ava. "We call a meeting tonight at the schoolhouse. It's on the edge of town, defensible, and it's neutral ground. We show people the evidence, explain what we're fighting for. Then we make a plan together." Ava felt hope and fear battling in her chest. "Mallory will come after us, probably." Dr. Morrell agreed. "But if we have enough people, if we're organized, he'll think twice about violence. And if we can hold him off for even a day, we can get riders to Ivory Tower with the evidence." Oh had been silent, thinking. Now he spoke. "There is another way, more dangerous, but faster. We destroy the dam ourselves tonight. Once the water flows free again, the physical evidence is there for any federal investigator to see. Even if Malalari catches us, even if he destroys these papers, the dam will be gone. The water pattern will be normal again. That tells its own story." "That's suicide," Big Ben said flatly. "Stanhope will have the dam guarded now that he knows you found it." Maybe Oka's eyes were dark and calm. "But if we move fast with enough people, we can destroy it before they can stop us. And once it's done, it's done. They cannot undestroy a dam." Ava understood what he was proposing. A direct assault on the source of Stanhope's power. Dangerous, likely to end in bloodshed, but bold. And if it worked, it would free the water immediately. "We do both," she said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. "We split into 2 groups. One group rides to Ivory Tower with copies of the evidence. Dr. Morrell can write out testimony. We can copy the diagram, make sure multiple people carry it. If one gets caught, others get through. The second group goes to the dam and destroys it. Even if Mallory stops one group, the other succeeds." Big Ben nodded slowly. "That could work. Divide his attention. Give both efforts a chance." "Then we call the meeting," Dr. Morrell said decisively. "Now tonight, we gather everyone who will stand with us, and we make this plan work." They gathered at the schoolhouse an hour later, nearly 30 people crowding into the small building, their faces grim and frightened, but determined. Farmers, storekeepers, laborers, even old widow Chen from the laundry carrying an ancient percussion rifle. Big Ben stood at the front. "Folks, I won't lie to you. What we're planning tonight is dangerous, but we've all been pushed too far for too long. Our water's been stolen, our land's dying. Our children are going hungry while Stanhope and Yanzi and their people grow fat. A murmur of angry agreement ran through the crowd. Ava Harov and Oteka have proof, real proof, that Julius Stanhope built an illegal dam to steal our water. That Sheriff Mallory took bribes to ignore it. That Ava's husband was murdered for trying to expose it. The murmur turned to shocked exclamations. Dr. Morurell stepped forward and held up the burned pages. I have portions of Nathaniel Harrov's ledger showing payments to Malalari diagrams of the dam system records of unnatural water patterns. And I have my own testimony. Nathaniel came to me the night he nearly died in a flood. A flood that was deliberately caused by opening both gates while he was trapped in the gorge. He survived that night, made it back to town, told me everything. Then he was killed to silence him. That's a mighty serious accusation. Someone called from the back. You saying Sheriff Mallory killed Nathaniel? I'm saying Nathaniel described the boot prints of one of the men he saw at the gate, Dr. Morurell replied. Distinctive boots worn smooth on the outside edges, deep on the inside. Everyone in this town has seen Sheriff Mallory's fancy boots. They match that description exactly. Another shocked murmur. People glancing at each other, realizing it was true. Ava stood, her legs shaking, but her voice clear. My husband died trying to protect all of us, trying to make sure we had water, had a future. I'm asking you to help me finish what he started. Not for revenge, for justice, for everyone who suffered under Stanhope's greed. Oka stepped beside her. The plan is simple. One group rides to Ivory Tower and sends telegraphs to the territorial marshal, the governor, anyone who will listen. The other group goes to Oxbow Bend and destroys the dam. We split Maller's attention. Even if he stops one group, the other succeeds. What about the risk? A nervous farmer asked. Maller's got pike and hired guns. They'll shoot us down. Maybe, O said calmly, but there are more of us than them, and we fight for our homes, our families. That gives us strength they don't have. Phoebe Ward raised her hand. I'll go to the dam. I know basic engineering my father taught me. I can help place charges if we have any. I have blasting powder, Gustav said, from when I tried to expand my mill foundation. Not much, but some. Percy Hartwell stood silently, his rifle in his hands, his presence an unspoken commitment. One by one, others stood. Not everyone. Some were too frightened, too old, had too many small children to risk. But enough, maybe 20 people willing to fight. Big Ben divided them into groups. Dr. Morurell, you lead the Ivory Tower group. Take our fastest riders and take multiple copies of everything. If anyone gets stopped, the others keep going. Oh, Tekka. Ava, you're with me at the dam. We'll need the schoolhouse door crashed open. Sheriff Mallory stood in the doorway backlit by torchlight, pike, and 6 armed men behind him. Mallory's round face was flushed with drink and rage. Well, well, look at this. A whole nest of traitors and troublemakers. His words were slurred, but his gun hand was steady. You're all under arrest for conspiracy and insurrection. Big Ben stepped forward, his Winchester rifle held casually but ready. On what authority, Tom? You got warrants for 30 people. I got all the authority I need. Mallory pulled a folded document from his coat. Judge Peterson signed this emergency order, giving me power to arrest anyone threatening the peace. You're all threatening the peace. Judge Peterson is Stanhope's cousin, Dr. Morurell said coldly. That order isn't worth the paper it's written on. It's worth enough. Mallory gestured, and his men spread out, rifles leveled. Now you folks are going to disperse peaceful-like. Go back to your homes and forget all this nonsense about dams and conspiracies, or we're going to have violence here tonight, and blood will be on your hands. Eva felt her heart hammering. They were trapped. The door behind Malalari was blocked. The windows were too small to climb through quickly. If shooting started in this confined space, people would die. Then O moved. He was standing near a table where a lantern burned. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the lantern and hurled it toward the back corner of the schoolhouse. Not at anyone, but at the stack of old wood planks stored there. The wood caught instantly, flames leaping up. Smoke began to fill the small building. "Fire!" someone screamed. Chaos erupted. People rushed toward the door toward Mallory and his men. In the confusion, with smoke filling the air and people shoving and shouting, Mallory's men couldn't shoot without hitting townspeople. Big Ben used his massive body to plow through the crowd, shoving Mallory aside. "Run everyone out the back window. Go." Gustav and Percy began smashing out the small windows, with rifle butts helping women and older people climb through. O grabbed Eva's hand and pulled her toward a window. "The children!" Eva screamed. "At Dr. Morel's house. I'll get them!" Dr. Morel shouted. "You go to the dam. Finish this." Eva hesitated for one agonized heartbeat, then let Oka pull her through the window. They dropped to the ground outside and ran into the darkness. Big Ben and several others beside them. Behind them, the schoolhouse burned bright against the night sky. Shouts and gunshots rang out, but they were already gone, scattering into the darkness like startled quail. They regrouped in a dry wash half a mile north of town. Eva O'Hite, Big Ben, Gustav, Percy, Phoebe, and 8 others who'd managed to escape the schoolhouse. Eva was frantic about her children, but Big Ben gripped her shoulder hard. "Dr. Morel will keep them safe. She's smart and she's tough. But we have to finish this tonight, Eva. If we don't destroy that dam, everything your husband died for means nothing. Your children's future depends on what we do right now." Eva nodded, forcing down the maternal panic. Big Ben was right. This was about more than just tonight. It was about whether her children would grow up with water and land and hope, or whether Stanhope's greed would drive them into destitution. "Mallory will be coming after us," Percy said quietly. "He'll know where we're headed. Then we move fast." "Oh," Tekka checked his rifle. "We reach the dam before him. Do the work. Get out." "Gustav, how much blasting powder do you have?" "Maybe 10 lb. Enough to blow a good-sized hole if we place it right." "Then that's what we do." Oh looked at each person. "This will be dangerous. People may die. No one will think less of you if you turn back now." No one moved. "Good. We ride." They mounted and rode north through the darkness, pushing hard. Ava's mind kept circling back to her children, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate task. The dam. Destroy the dam. Free the water. Everything else came after. They reached Oxbow Bend as the moon rose, painting the canyon in shades of silver and black. The dam squatted in its side gorge like a malignant growth, 20 ft high and 30 ft across a solid wall of timber and stone. There were no guards visible. Either Stanhope hadn't thought they'd be foolish enough to come back, or his men were hidden in the darkness waiting. "Could be a trap," Big Ben muttered. "Probably is." Oh agreed. "But we're here. We do this." He looked at Gustav. "Where do we place the powder for maximum effect?" Gustav studied the dam structure in the moonlight. "There and there." He pointed to 2 support timbers at the base. "Blow those. The whole thing weakens. The water pressure will do the rest." They climbed down into the gorge, moving as quietly as possible. Gustav and Percy began placing charges, working with careful speed. Phoebe helped her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. Oh, and Big Ben kept watch rifles ready. Ava stayed close to them, her borrowed Colt heavy in her hand. That's when the shooting started. Muzzle flashes erupted from the canyon rim pike, and at least 10 men opening fire. Bullets spanged off rocks, kicked up dirt. One of the farmers who'd come with them, a young man named Charlie, went down with a cry, clutching his leg. "Get to cover," Big Ben roared. They scattered, diving behind boulders. Returned fire began, sporadic and desperate. They were outnumbered and pinned down, trapped in the bottom of the canyon. "How long until those charges are ready?" "Oh," shouted to Gustav. "5 minutes, maybe less." "We don't have 5 minutes," Big Ben fired, levered another round, fired again. "They're going to flank us." He was right. Ava could see figures moving along the rim, trying to get behind them. In minutes, they'd be surrounded, caught in a crossfire with no escape. "I'll draw them off," Oiteka said suddenly. "Give you time to finish the charges." "That's suicide." Ava grabbed his arm. "You can't." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw resignation and determination. "This matters more than one life. Finish it, Ava. Free the water. Tell your children why." Before she could stop him, he was moving, climbing out of the gorge on the opposite side, deliberately exposing himself, firing at the men on the rim to draw their attention. It worked. Half the gun swung toward him. He ran along the canyon rim, a moving target in the moonlight, firing and moving, firing and moving. Bullets chewed the ground around him, but he kept going, leading them away from the gorge. "No." Ava screamed, but he was already gone, disappearing into the darkness with Pike's men in pursuit. "Ava!" Big Ben grabbed her. "He bought us time. Don't waste it. Help Gustav." She turned back to the charges, tears streaming down her face, hands shaking so badly she could barely function. Phoebe gripped her shoulder. "We finish this for him, for Nathaniel, for everyone." Eva nodded and forced her hands to steady. She helped Gustav connect the fuses, her mind screaming at her to go after, her training forcing her to stay and complete the task. "Done," Gustav shouted. "Light it and run." Big Ben struck a match, touched it to the fuse. They caught sparking and spitting, racing toward the charges. "Move everyone out now." They scrambled up the far side of the gorge, helping Charlie, who was bleeding badly from his leg wound. Behind them, the fuse burned down. 10 seconds. 5. The explosion was massive, a roar that shook the ground and lit the night like false dawn. The 2 support timbers disintegrated. For a moment, the dam held. Then, with a grinding crack, like the world breaking the entire structure, collapsed. Water roared through the Brerique. Not a gentle flow, but a brown wall of pent-up pressure finally released a year's worth of stolen water, charging downstream in a boiling torrent. It swept away the remaining timbers, scoured the gorge clean, and thundered toward the parched farms below. Ava stood on the rim, watching the water run free, and felt no triumph, only terror for Oha, who'd sacrificed himself to buy them time. "We have to find him," she said desperately. "We have to, Eva. Look." Big Ben pointed south. Riders were coming from Buffalo Gap. A lot of riders, maybe 20 or more. For a horrible moment, Eva thought it was more of Stanhope's men. Then she saw the badges glinting in the moonlight. Federal marshals. The marshals arrived like the cavalry in a dime novel, but they were too late to prevent the violence, only to witness its aftermath. Marshal Cyrus Wade, a tall man with an iron-gray beard and cold blue eyes, dismounted and surveyed the scene with professional calm. And the destroyed dam, the water roaring freely, the wounded and exhausted fighters. "Someone want to tell me what in blazes happened here?" His voice carried authority that made everyone snap to attention. Dr. Morrell pushed through the group of marshals on horseback, Eva's 3 children with her. "Marshal Wade, thank the stars you came. Your telegraph reached us in Yankton this afternoon. We rode straight through." Wade looked at Dr. Morrell. "You're the physician who sent the message." "I am. And I have evidence of conspiracy, water theft, bribery, and murder. She handed him the burned ledger pages and the testimony about Nathaniel's death. Wade read quickly by lantern light, his expression darkening. These are serious accusations. Where's Sheriff Mallory? Coming, Big Ben said grimly, pointing south. Indeed, another group of riders was approaching Mallory Pike, and their remaining men riding hard. When Mallory saw the federal marshals, he reined in sharply his face, going from rage to fear in an instant. Marshal Wade. Mallory blustered, dismounting. Thank goodness you're here. These people are insurrectionists. They've destroyed private property, assaulted lawful. Shut your mouth, Mallory. WDE's voice was like ice. I've got testimony here that says you took bribes from Julius Stanhope to ignore an illegal dam, that you were present when Nathaniel Hargrove was murdered, that you've been part of a conspiracy to steal water and drive farmers off their land. Mallory's face went white. That's slander, lies from troublemakers. Then you won't mind if we verify some physical evidence. Wade gestured to his deputies. Bring him here. Take off his boots. You can't. Two deputies grabbed Mallory and hauled him forward. One pulled off his right boot and held it up to the lantern light. The distinctive wear pattern was clear. The outside edge worn smooth, the inside edge deep. Wade compared it to Nathaniel's written description. A perfect match. Thomas Mallory, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and accessory to murder. Mallory's face crumpled. I didn't kill him. Stanhope made me help. He threatened to ruin me if I didn't. Save it for the judge. Wade nodded to his deputies, who shackled Mallory roughly. Pike had gone very quiet, very still. Wade turned to him. Deadshot, Pike. I've heard of you. They say you've killed 12 men. 14. Pike's scarred face was expressionless, but never murdered nobody who wasn't trying to kill me first. I worked for Stanhope, guarded his property, scared folks off. I didn't know about the Harrov killing until after. That wasn't my deal. You willing to testify against Stanhope? Pike was silent for a long moment then. Yeah, I'm done. Wade nodded. We'll take that under consideration at sentencing. Where's Stanhope now? At his ranch, Pike said. White Buffalo 5 miles west. We'll get him. Wade turned to survey the group of exhausted, wounded civilians. You folks did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid tonight. You could all have been killed, but you've struck a blow against corruption that will be felt throughout the territory. The water flows free because of you. Ava barely heard him. Her mind was on Oka, missing, possibly dead somewhere in the darkness. She turned to Wade. Marshal, there's a Manohite, a Lakota, who's been helping us. He drew Pike's men away from the dam so we could destroy it. He's still out there. We'll search for him, Wade promised. But Eva couldn't wait. She took a lantern from one of the deputies and walked into the darkness, calling his name. Big Ben followed, then others spreading out across the canyon. They found him 20 minutes later, collapsed behind a boulder, half a mile from the dam. He had been shot once through the shoulder, once grazing his ribs. He was conscious, but weak blood soaking his shirt. Ava, his voice was barely a whisper. The dam destroyed. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed fabric against his wounds. The water's free. You did it. We did it. His hand found hers, gripping weakly. Your children safe. Dr. Morell brought them. They're safe. Tears streamed down her face. Don't you dare die, Oteka. Don't you dare leave me now. His eyes closed, not planning to. Dr. Morell arrived with her medical kit and took over, working quickly to stop the bleeding to stabilize him. He's lost blood, but the wounds aren't immediately fatal. We need to get him back to my clinic now. They carried him carefully back to the marshal's camp. Marshal Wade had sent deputies to arrest Stan Hope. The ranch owner was found trying to flee with saddlebags full of gold and was brought back in handcuffs, cursing and threatening lawsuits all the way. As dawn broke over the canyon, the water still ran clear and strong and free, pouring down the gorge, spreading out across the parched land below. Farmers would wake to find their creek beds running again, their fields saved, their futures restored. Eva sat beside Oha as they transported him carefully back to town, holding his hand, refusing to let go. He drifted in and out of consciousness. But each time he woke, his eyes found hers, and she saw recognition connection, something deeper than words. The circuit judge arrived 3 days later and convened court immediately. The courthouse was packed, everyone in Buffalo Gap and half the surrounding county came to witness justice. The evidence was overwhelming, the burned ledger pages showing payments to Mallory, Dr. Morrell's testimony about treating Nathaniel the night he was nearly killed, the matching boot pattern, Pike's confession. He testified that Stan Hope had ordered Mallory to take care of the Harrove problem after Nathaniel survived the flood, that Mallory and 2 deputies had followed Nathaniel from Dr. Morrell's house and drowned him at Cedar Ford, making it look accidental. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Julius Stan Hope, guilty of conspiracy water theft and ordering murder. 25 years hard labor at the territorial prison. Thomas Mallory, guilty of bribery, conspiracy, and murder. 25 years hard labor. Dedge shot Pike 10 years in exchange for his testimony to be served out of the territorial prison with leniency for his cooperation, given his cooperation. The courtroom erupted in applause. Ava sat in the front row, her children beside her, and felt nothing, no joy, no satisfaction, just numbness. Justice had been served. But Nathaniel was still dead. That would never change. Afterward, as people celebrated in the street, Ava returned to Dr. Morrell's clinic, where O'Hite was recovering. His wounds were healing well. Dr. Morrell was an excellent surgeon, but he'd be weak for weeks yet. She sat beside his bed, and they talked quietly about the future, about what came next. "I'll stay until I'm healed," O said. "Help with the planting if you need, but then I should go north. I don't belong in towns, Eva. I never have." She'd known this was coming, but it still hurt. "Where will you go?" "North into the territories. Maybe find work as a scout or guide." "Keep moving. It's all I know." He paused. "But I will come back when you need me. When the land needs defending again. I promise you that." "How will I call you?" Eva whispered. "You won't need to. I'll know." He reached up and touched her face gently. Some bonds don't require words or presence to remain strong. She understood. This wasn't a fairy tale ending, not a romantic union. It was something more real and more complicated. 2 people who'd survived together, who understood each other's scars, who would remain connected across distance and time in ways that defied simple definition. She leaned down slowly, and their foreheads touched, breaths mingling. An understanding passed between them, a promise of future connection without the chains of possession or expectation. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. You saved yourself, Ava. You and your courage. I just walked beside you for a while." 6 weeks later, Ava received a summons to the courthouse in Eagle's Perch. She made the journey with her children, uncertain why she'd been called. County Surveyor Walter Finch, a stooped old man with kind eyes, spread an ancient map on the judge's desk. "Mrs. Hargrove, while reviewing land records as part of the Stan Hope case, I found something extraordinary. Your husband filed for senior water rights on Lightning Ridge Creek 3 years ago, citing prior settlement and continuous use." Eva's breath caught. "I knew he'd applied, but we never heard anything because someone likely bribed by Stan Hope buried the approval in the county records office. But I found the original filing in the territorial archives in Yankton. Your husband's claim was officially approved 18 months ago. It was simply never recorded locally. He pointed to stamps and seals on the ancient document. This means, Mrs. Tarove, that you hold senior water rights on Lightning Ridge Creek. First use rights, priority rights. No one can dam, divert, or control that water without your explicit written permission. And anyone who tries will face federal prosecution. Eva stared at the document, unable to process what she was hearing. Judge Hoskins leaned forward. In simple terms, Mrs. Harrove, your husband secured the legal right to the water before he died. He protected you and your children even though he never got the chance to tell you. Stan Hope's dam was not only illegal, it violated your prior claim. You have complete legal protection now. The water is ours. Ava's voice was barely audible. Yours absolutely and irrevocably. The judge slid another envelope across the table. And we found this in your husband's files at the surveyor's office. It's addressed to you. With trembling hands, Ava opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Nathaniel's handwriting dated April 13th, one day before he was nearly killed. My dearest Ava, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me. And the fight over water has turned deadly as I feared. The senior water rights were approved. I received notice 3 weeks ago, but told no one except Walter Finch, because I didn't trust local officials. Stan Hope has been pressuring me to sell cheap, and I've refused. I believe he may try to force me off the land. I've documented everything in my ledger, the dam, the illegal diversions payments I've witnessed. If something happens to me, get the ledger to federal authorities. Don't trust Malalari. I saw him take money from Stanhope's foreman. You are the strongest person I know, Ava. Even if you don't see it yourself, you've always been the strength in this family. Take care of our children. Teach them that doing right matters more than doing easy. Teach them that some things are worth fighting for, even at great cost. I love you more than words can express. If there is justice in this world or the next, those who've done wrong will answer for it. Forever yours, Nathaniel. Ava read through blinding tears, her whole body shaking. Nathaniel had known. He'd known the danger and faced it anyway, trying to protect them. And he'd succeeded. The water rights he'd secured meant her children would never face what she'd faced, would never know that kind of desperation. Thank you, she whispered to the judge, to the surveyor, to the memory of her husband. Thank you. 2 months after the trial, Eva stood at the door of her cabin at floodplain, watching the sun set over Lightning Ridge. The fields around the cabin were green with new growth, corn-wheat vegetables. The creek sang over smooth stones, running clear and strong. In the distance, she could see Big Ben working his land, and beyond that, smoke from Buffalo Gap, where life had slowly returned to something like normal. Inside, her children were laughing at something Margaret had said. They were healing slowly, painfully, but healing. Owen's scar was fading. Thomas slept through the nights now. Margaret smiled often and was teaching younger children to read at Phoebe's reopened school. On the table sat several objects that told her story, a smooth creekstone reminder that what was stolen could be restored. Nathaniel's letter carefully folded and preserved, the legal document securing their water rights, a pressed wildflower from the first bloom after the water returned. And beside these, a single eagle feather left behind by Oteka when he'd ridden north 2 weeks ago, wounds healed enough to travel. He would come back. She believed that with certainty. She couldn't explain and didn't need to. When the seasons turned, or when someone threatened her water again, or simply when the land called him, he would return. Some promises didn't need words to be binding. Eva touched the feather gently, then turned back to her children, to the evening meal that needed cooking, to the life that stretched ahead. Hard work, Yes, always hard work on the frontier, but work with purpose, with hope, with water and land and future. As darkness fell over floodplain, the mill wheel in Buffalo Gap turned steadily. The schoolhouse rebuilt after the fire rang with children's voices. Families received fair measures at Percy Hartwell's new general store, where credit was based on character rather than wealth. And in the cabin by Lightning Ridge Creek, Eva Harrove tucked her children into bed, kissed their foreheads, and sat by the window, watching stars emerge like promises scattered across the prairie sky. She didn't know exactly when Oka would return, but she knew he would. Because some bonds forged in survival and tempered by justice and sacrifice were stronger than distance or time or conventional definition. The creek ran clear and true, restored to its natural path. The land was healing green, returning to brown, and life hard beautiful and worth every fight continued under the endless western sky. Bye.